Hi everyone. Let's look at some composers who died before they turned 40. It is often assumed that people who lived maybe 100, 200, 300 years ago died much younger than people are dying today. In some ways this is correct, because their medical science, as an example, wasn't as evolved. People died from common things like getting a simple injury and then dying of gangrene because there was no disinfection. The same principle would have applied to musicians of the day, as they lived in the same conditions. Of the most famous composers, the youngest death that I could find was for Franz Schubert. He died at the age of 31. From the observations of the medical practitioners that he saw, his symptoms matched those of mercury poisoning. In those days, mercury was a common treatment for syphilis. This led researchers to believe that Schubert actually suffered from syphilis, and due to the treatment using mercury, he died of the side effects of the mercury poisoning. He was experiencing headaches, fever, swollen joints, and vomiting. He couldn't keep down any food. 5 days before he died, his friend Carl Holst visited him with his string quartet. Schubert requested that the last thing he wants to hear before his death is Beethoven's String Quartet No. 14 in C-sharp minor. Vincenzo Bellini died at the age of 33. His funeral arrangements were actually arranged by Rossini, another well-known composer. After his death, an autopsy was conducted to find out the reason for his death. A court-appointed doctor, known as Dr. Dalmas, performed the autopsy, and he concluded that Bellini succumbed to an acute inflammation of the colon, compounded by an abscess in the liver. The inflammation of the intestine had produced violent symptoms of dysentery during life. The composer we all know as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart actually had an extremely long, proper Christian name: Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart. He died at the age of 35. Until today, the cause of Mozart's death is not really known. Doctors have speculated many causes, including rheumatic fever, streptococcal infection, influenza, mercury poisoning, and a rare kidney ailment. Mozart himself believed that he was poisoned. Georges Alexander César Leopold Bizet died at the age of 36. Bizet was a long-time smoker, and he on and off had bouts of what he referred to as throat angina. In 1875, after Carmen was debuted, he was convinced that it was a complete failure, and this led him to recover much more slowly. He had an attack in March of 1875 and another one again in May. Towards the end of May, he actually started feeling better, and at his holiday home, he went for a swim in the Seine River. On the next day, the 1st of June, he had a high fever and pain, and it seemed that he suffered a heart attack. He temporarily recovered, but on the 3rd of June in the early morning hours, he suffered a second heart attack. What makes it even more sad is that the 3rd of June was his wedding anniversary. Jakob Ludwig Felix Mendelssohn died at the age of 38. Towards the end of his life, Mendelssohn suffered from poor health. He had a lot of nervous problems and he was extremely overworked. He was constantly exhausted and ill, and the death of his sister Fanny caused him even further distress. About 6 months after the death of his sister, on the 4th of November 1847, Mendelssohn died in Leipzig after a series of strokes. This seems to have been a family illness that he inherited as well, as his grandfather Moses, Fanny, and both his parents had died from something similar. George Gershwin died at the age of 38. On the night of July the 9th, 1937, Gershwin collapsed at home and was rushed to hospital. He fell into a coma, and only then the doctors realized that he might be suffering from a brain tumor. The search started for a neurosurgeon. The recommendation was one Dr. Walter Dandy, who was on holiday. He was already retired. He was fetched, and the Coast Guard was actually sent to go and fetch him from his boat, bring him ashore, and then rush him to the hospital to perform emergency surgery. He removed a large tumor from Gershwin, but it was too late. He died on the morning of Sunday, July the 11th, 1937. Frédéric Francois Chopin died at the age of 39. His health continued to deteriorate towards the end. Modern research suggests that apart from all other illnesses he might have suffered, he possibly suffered also from temporal lobe epilepsy. He died at 2 o'clock in the morning on October 17, 1849. The doctor that attended gave his official cause of death as tuberculosis of the lungs and larynx. In part 2, I will introduce you to some of the composers that lived on the other side of the scale, all of them exceeding the age of 80. I hope you stay well, and I will see you in part 2.